Peter Goers here with the second hour of our evening show here on ABC Radio Adelaide across South Australia and into the silver city of Broken Hill. Tanya from there saying, sorry, glare obscured some text. We'll take again when mobile camera not full. Oh, fair enough. Thank you. No, I'm curious, Tanya. Coming up, a lot of fringe. There's so much happening that is worthy of our interest here on ABC Radio Adelaide for the fringe. Now, the Conservation Council of South Australia has published a booklet called The Proposed National Radioactive Waste Facility, Implications and Options for South Australia, December 2021. We're joined now by Craig Wilkins, the Chief Executive of Conservation SA. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Peter.
Now, we also invited the Minister for Resources, Keith Pitt, the Member for Grey, Rowan Ramsey, and both of them are huge and very vocal exponents of the nuclear waste dump, and also Sam Usher, who's the CEO of Australian Radioactive Waste Agency, that's ARWA. And we were told Rowan Ramsey was unable to participate, and we received no response from the others. So that's Minister for Resources Keith Pitt and also the CEO of the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency. But you're here, Craig.
Just as well.
The book is I congratulate you because it's very rational. It's without rancour, and it's, I think, well, as far as I can see, well researched. And you put your case well. Who wrote it, Craig?
Well, I was the prime author, but there's a lot of people who've got an interest in this area. So I certainly got a lot of expertise from different people to make sure that we did have the right evidence and the right research.
And it's very readable. It uses graphics, and it puts the case, your case, very well.
Thank you.
Now, begin.
This story for me is about what's the best option for Australia's long-term radioactive waste. And the concerning thing that I see is that we are going down a path of a temporary solution rather than doing a permanent solution once and doing it well. So currently we have all these radioactive isotopes in Lucas Heights in Sydney. They need to be disposed of permanently. And international best practice is to find a place somewhere in a remote area and bury it deeply underground in a very stable environment. But that's not what's proposed in Kimba. What's proposed is for them to ship this waste across to prime agricultural area in South Australia and then park it temporarily above ground while they work out where to do that permanent
This is
disposal.
the intermediate waste.
That's right.
Will be parked for 100 years.
Well, that's what they are suggesting, because there's actually two facilities they're proposing, one for low-level waste and one for intermediate-level waste. And there's a big difference between those two types of waste. The low-level waste is the stuff that they often talk about, which is those sort of hospital gloves and gowns, the leftover smoke detectors and medical equipment and signs and things like that. That stuff can be buried in a low burial point, and we can do that as Australia quite successfully. I've got no doubt about that. The intermediate level waste is a completely different thing. That has to be kept safe for 10,000 years, which is twice the life of the Pyramids of Giza. It's an amazing length of time to be kept safe.
Well, so it's 100 years, Craig.
Well, true. I mean, all of it is long, but in terms of perspective, I mean, 10,000 years is before we cultivated wheat. It is such a long distance in the past, and therefore thinking ahead, can we honestly preserve it in a way which can be safely held for future generations. And that is a big, long project. And it will involve a lot of research, to get the right site. And we suggest it should be moved once safely when that site is built.
1300 222 891. I would like your views on this, please, or 0467 922 891 on the text line. People are very divided. Kimba remains divided. We've had, there were something like 300 millimetres of rain in Kimba a couple of weeks ago. A once in 100 year, or so they say, rain, heavy rain. I won't say rain event, I hate that term. And of course, we had calls from farmers in that area saying, well, what does this mean for nuclear waste that's buried there? We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, next year, let alone in 100 years, let alone in 10,000 years. How can we possibly know?
Yeah, absolutely. And the ironic thing is that the other site that was proposed in South Australia for a potential nuclear waste facility was in the Flinders Ranges, in a place called Wallabadina. And a big part of the reason why that one was withdrawn and removed from consideration was because that was discovered to be on an active floodplain. So that awareness about the risk of flooding is certainly there. And as you say, what we saw recently was that risk is also there at Kimba. And that's why, in terms of placing it temporarily in an above-ground shed, essentially, is not the smart solution, because that's when things like flooding come into consideration. And
also there's the issue of we're leaving this, governments have seized upon this idea and pushed it through, even to the point of, the former Minister, Matt Canavan, suggested that there had to be a 65% majority wanting this in a community, but that benchmark was lowered because only, I think, 61.6% of the Kimba community who were polled, which was polled, because there were lots of other people nearby, the Bangala people, the Aboriginal traditional owners, were not polled. So, you see, rules change. And something that concerns me, Craig, is they say that we're not, this is our waste, this is Australian nuclear waste. But what's to stop us importing nuclear waste in years to come? Now, the government's saying that's illegal now, but governments can change their mind, as we saw with Minister Matt Canavan and his 65% benchmark. We could be importing nuclear waste from all around the world.
Yeah, what we see time and time again is a sense of mission creep or project creep, where the rules, as you say, do change over time. That issue you raise around the level of community support really shows why people are concerned about this in terms of, in particular, the Bangala traditional owners. So you've got, they were given native title to this region in, I think, 2015, so about 7 years ago. And this is the first, perhaps one of the first true tests about how seriously we consider that issue of native title, because they did ask to be polled. They wanted to have a say in whether they received this facility or not, and they were deliberately excluded. And as a result, the Bangala traditional owners have actually taken the federal government to the court. They're actually fighting that in the Supreme Court. So that's a live legal battle right now, because they say they weren't consulted.
And you cite the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that states should take effective measures to ensure that no storage or disposal of hazardous materials should take place in the lands or territories of Indigenous people, etc. The South Australian government, the former government, voted not to have a nuclear dump in South Australia. So, and South Australia has not been consulted, Craig. have we? Only the people of Kimba have been consulted. And politicians have come on this show and mocked people who don't live in Kimba, even though it's a state issue, it's a national issue, surely, isn't it? And this material is going to be either come by sea or be trundled through 3 states to get here.
And ultimately, any facility right now is illegal under South Australian law. It was originally a bill that was passed in the Liberal Olsen era, and there's been a long-term bipartisan opposition to facilities like this. And I mean, the thing is that there actually is a really viable alternative. In the last federal budget, the Morrison government actually allocated $60 million to extend the life of waste storage at Lucas Heights. And at Lucas Heights, you've got all the expertise, you've got all the security, you've got all the monitoring. They are perfectly placed to look after this waste while that search for the longer-term facility goes along. And so we suggest, for all sorts of reasons, including economically, it makes far more sense to leave the waste at Lucas Heights and then move it once when we finally work out where to store it deep underground.
Let's go to Greg Bannon of the Flinders Action Group, who fought this nuclear dump coming to the Flinders. Hello, Greg.
Oh, hello, Peter.
What would you add here, Greg, please?
Peter, I just support everything Craig has said. This site at Kimba is in the wrong place, and it's just not scientific. The whole approach has been to try and find a willing community and then make the facility fit that local geology. And that's just not scientific. And the point I really wanted to make is should be very clear in our minds. In the last month, Kimba has received amazingly above record rains, or above all pre-recorded recordings, and one of the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency guidelines for siting a nuclear waste facility, is it should not be in an area where you've got across-country water flows or subsoil water. There's water tables underneath. Now, when the Department of Innovation, Industry and Science, DIIS, they've now changed to a different name, DISA, had their site characterisation studies by a company called AECOM. They produced a report for the 3 sites that were, this was back a couple of years ago, Wallabadina, which is on the edge of the Flinders Ranges, and 2 sites at Kimba, including Napandi, which is the one we're talking about. In their Napandi site characterisation study, they said there's very little relevant data on flood events in the area. Well, I put it to you and to everyone, they now have very relevant, very recent, and it's in the mind. You can even see the roads washed away and the paddocks washed away. And I think that should be factored into this whole debate.
Greg, thank you very much for coming on. Greg Bannon, and Greg called in. Let's go to Philippa. Hello, Philippa. Hello, Philippa. Are you there? If you'd like to make a point.
Hello.
Hello, Philippa. We're very glad to have any reaction here. Someone saying this is a one-sided conversation. We did invite, I repeat, we invited the Minister for Resources, Keith Pitt, who didn't even get back to us, the CEO of the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency, Sam Usher, he didn't get back to us, and the member for Grey, Rowan Ramsey, who is a great exponent of this nuclear dump in his electorate of Kimba, and in fact he's a neighbour, his farm at Buckleboo neighbours this. He was unavailable. So if you'd like to put the case for the nuclear dump at Kimba, please do so. Yes, Philippa.
Hello. I was not actually planning to put the case for the nuclear dump, but just raise a couple of related points.
Yes.
I think Craig's done a great job in laying it out. And in terms of the type of radioactive waste that might be heading to Kimba, on the metal isotopes, smoke detectors, we have a great example from Canada, who has been making a wonderful amount of money for themselves by selling isotopes for nuclear medicine from cyclotrons, which bypasses a lot of the unwelcome radioactive waste from reactors. So there's worth looking into where we are sourcing our medical isotopes, looking to Canada. Looking further afield to France, we've sold the French uranium, and I believe that as a country we have done some deal which involves us taking back radioactive waste from their reactors. So again, it would be worth having a very alert eye to what is the thin end of a wedge if they build a shed above ground for taking low-level and intermediate waste.
That is the concern, and I voiced that earlier, and I'm sure Craig shares that concern. What guarantees do we have in the next 100 or in the next 10,000 years that we're not going to import nuclear waste from other countries? Thank you for your call, Philippa. I'm anxious to take calls on this. Mark from Mount Barker says, where would be the best long-term storage location? That's a good question, Craig.
Yeah, absolutely. And the question is, the answer is we actually don't know because the work hasn't been done. And that's the frustrating thing about this whole process is they're putting the cart before the horse. They're moving it temporarily and storing it in South Australia when they begin the work of finding out where to move it long term, rather than doing that longer and more important work first.
Lots of support for the Conservation Council here. Kay from Port Augusta saying, if this nuclear waste is so safe, leave it at nuclear heights. Sonia says, having a nuclear waste so close to us literally terrifies me. Eyre Peninsula has a great, genuine green agricultural reputation. This is a huge agricultural and fish farming area. This will do nothing to add to the reputation of our precious land. And don't get me started on the lack of Indigenous and community consultation. That's Sonia in Cowell. Dave Sweeney is saying, evening, Peter, there's no compelling reason behind the federal plan. It's ill-considered and has been tragically politicised. Well done to Craig Williams, the Bangala people and others who are, now I've lost that text, voicing concerns, yes. The other thing that concerns me, Craig, and we do hear from both sides of this issue in Kimba, it has divided Kimba, and also has this community been bribed to take this? I mean, there are rivers of gold in Kimba at the moment with the promise of more and more money. Now, you know, this is a struggling rural community. It needs employment. It's being offered the carrot of employment, and there will be a number of jobs. How many jobs is still moot because much bigger nuclear dumps in France, I think, employ fewer people than the federal government is promising. What do you think of this in Kimba? It must be hard for the people of Kimba to turn their backs on these rivers of gold, Craig.
Yeah, it's been a really, I think, a rather disappointing process in terms of the community there, like every other South Australian community, deserves decent medical facilities, decent sporting facilities, decent community facilities. And there's been a package of support being offered in return for them accepting this facility, which contains investment by government, which should just be standard for any community, and that makes it a very challenging position for the Kimba people to work out whether to accept it or not, and there is nothing more divisive than this whole question of nuclear facilities or nuclear activity full stop. And it seems a real shame that this previously very close-knit community has had this bomb placed in the middle of it and it has really divided people. It's a terrible shame.
I do feel for the people of Kimba because, and I hope that they have the 61.6% who voted for this dump, this nuclear dump, have considered that soon Kimba is going to be known, worldwide as the nuclear dump town, not the town that's halfway across Australia, not the home of the big galah, but it will be known as that, and it'll be the butt of many, many jokes. Won't it, Craig?
Yeah, potentially, because certainly if you think of, Fukushima or Chernobyl or any of those sort of places which have been associated with nuclear activity, it very, very quickly gets linked in people's minds. Yeah, and it's such a shame because this is a highly successful agricultural community with, rural town of the year and some fantastic people.
I mean, far be it for me to put Rowan Ramsey's position, and he's been very vocal in support of this dump from the word go, but he I think has a valid point that the population of Kimba has had this for many years now, and no one is more knowledgeable on the issues than the population of Kimba. I mean, they didn't just vote without knowledge. There was a great deal of effort put into educating the people of Kimba on the position of the dump and against the dump. So they voted in full knowledge. Craig, what would you say to that?
There was a long debate, there's no doubt, but I would suggest that there's been a little bit of definitely spin and some very close to stretching of the truth around the types of materials that will be sent and the impact in terms, as you say, around things like jobs and ongoing employment. If you do the analysis around comparable facilities overseas, they are talking quite extraordinary levels of employment here compared to other places.
Lots of text. The Napandee site was well chosen. There was no damage or runoff from the recent rain, says Jeanette. And someone else is saying, Lorraine is saying, interesting how the recent flooding event in the Kimba district actually showed that the site is very well selected regarding big rain. In a once-in-a-lifetime event, the site did not flood or even suffer erosion, despite it being surrounded by such impacts. Someone else is saying the money being spent in Kimba is obscene, new facilities everywhere. Someone else is saying ANSO is trying to make a profit exporting isotopes overseas, but sweeping all of the wastes under the border into SA. Someone else is saying Minister Pitt has increasingly ramped up the need for the facility, making exaggerated claims of nuclear medicine needing the facility. This, despite nuclear medicine, is mostly used for medical imaging, but just 3% of that is worth saying that X-rays are not nuclear medicine, nor is radiotherapy or chemotherapy. Now, we're getting a lot of, we always get a lot of texts saying, why don't we put it here, there and everywhere, Maralinga, Woomera and Roxby. And Bill, I think, has a suggestion here. Hello, Bill. You there, Bill? No? Yes.
Hello?
Hello, Bill. Go ahead.
Yeah, what's wrong with putting the stuff back in the ground where it came from? They've got huge mine sites, very deep ground. Why don't they just bury it in concrete at the bottom of those pits?
Craig Wilkins, Conservation SA, yes.
Yeah, well, that's where the work has to be done to work out where the best spot is ultimately. And I mean, when you dig up the uranium initially and then you do all the processing, you do change its composition quite significantly. And so often old mining sites aren't regarded as the most stable or appropriate site for long-term disposal. But at the end of the day, the work hasn't been done. And potentially some of those places where mining has occurred in the past could be a logical solution, but only once the research is done.
David. Hello, David.
Yeah, g'day, Peter. I think you've actually answered one of your own questions there when you're talking about, the money being thrown at Kimba is obscene and this should be occurring anyway. And
that
why
was
they
a texter, yes.
Sorry, yeah. And but I think the point that you made before that Kimba would be a bit of a byline for jokes and so on in the future, suggests that even if it's the safest facility in the world, if that's what's going to happen, then to get people over the line, they are going to have to throw some money at it to get people across it. Because it doesn't matter how safe it is, there is going to be a negative connotation with it.
Of course.
I think to suggest that they're going to be a bit of a joke in the world is a pretty poor reason for them not to go ahead with it, in all honesty. Often there's a whole lot more weightier arguments to make than that.
Yes, indeed.
And at the end of the day, we've got to accept the fact that...
I meant not so much a joke, but I meant that Kimba will be known for that one thing, won't it?
It will, but, there are worse things that have happened, in all honesty, than being known for a place that takes some product which might save people's lives. I could think of much worse ways to consider that. And I think that, if Kimba are prepared to take some funds coming in their direction and do their bit in terms of supporting saving lives across not just Australia but the world with the isotopes which are exported out of Lucas Heights at the moment, for example, then more power to them. It's got to go somewhere. It's going to be unpopular. People are going to be unhappy, and at some stage we've got to put our big boy pants on and say this is pretty awful. At some stage we've just got to accept that this is going to be an uncomfortable decision, and we're going to have to live with it.
Someone's suggesting that thank you very much, David, that's a fair point. Someone's suggesting that the Kimba people were mainly provided with the pro side of the argument. Craig Wilkins, the final word, please.
Perhaps I could just respond to what David said, and I agree, it was a well-considered comment. But ultimately I'd say that we actually... Kimba doesn't have to, or any place doesn't have to accept this facility because it's actually not needed. There is a good, cheaper, long-term solution that is the safest option at Lucas Heights while the work is done on solving this issue, which we do have to grapple with as a country. But what is proposed now is not the solution. It is only a temporary option that is actually placing this community at a disadvantage for no genuine reason in terms of nuclear medicine or any other benefit in terms of public health or economy.
There's a text, the process conducted in Kimba to coerce the community to accept and want this waste dump has been far from the spruiked international best practice the government often refers to. It leaves a once united community divided and scarred and results in half the district struggling to see a way forward. That's interesting. And I thank you very much, Craig. Can people get a copy of this booklet, please?
Yes, if people jump onto our website at conservationsa.org.au, there's copies of it there.
And as I said at the outset, it's a well-considered, rational document without rancour, and it provides alternatives. Thank you for coming on, Craig Wilkins, Chief Executive of Conservation SA. And I repeat that the Minister for Resources, Keith Pitt, and also the CEO of the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency, Sam Usher, were both invited to participate but did not return our calls. And the member for Grey, Rowan Ramsey, was unavailable. Time for the weather.